Hey everybody, welcome to Flyin Miata. My name is Kyle. Today we're going over part 1 of our stage 3 fan kit install. And we're going to be going over the installation of the shroud and the fans. Alright, I got a little bit of a head start on the disassembly. I went ahead and pulled the splash pan, went ahead and drained the cooling system, unhooked the plumbing, unhooked the electrical for the fans, and I pulled out the fans and the radiator as an assembly. And I also loosened the sway bar brackets. So the sway bar is a little bit more free to move because that will give us some much needed space to move around as we go to fit this thing. So here we are. Another little tip I do when I go to put the radiator in case it goes a little wonky, I don't want to scratch anything, so I put 3, 4, 5 layers of masking tape in any area where I may inadvertently bump, just so I don't get any kind of scratches in the paint. So let's begin. Alright, this particular NA Miata is highly modified, has a few things different than you might have on your car. So there will be a few things that we have to do here that may not pertain to your particular install. But the principle is that there are going to be a few things that you may have to focus on to get this fan kit to fit. It is a large kit fitting into a small area, so there may be some interferences that you have to deal with. So in this case, I've already done some disassembly. Part of that disassembly is getting rid of a few things that were specific to this car. I removed the turbo inlet, I removed the bypass valve, and so kind of here is where we're at now. Here I am with the kit laid out. So we have the shroud, we have the high flow brushless spall fans, we have the harnesses that are included, and we have the baggie of goodies, which is our electrical and our hardware that makes this all fit together. I don't have the controller kit because this particular install has a standalone ECU that is capable of running PWM outputs. So I don't have the controller in this case. Your kit might have it. It's not that much more to install. You notice it is laying on a cross-flow radiator. This kit is specifically designed to fit with the cross-flow and may or may not fit with other radiator options. And just so you're aware, radiator is not included with the fan kit. It is just the shroud, the fans, and the electrical. So let's go over a few things in detail now. Alright, I've done a little bit of the assembly so far. I've installed the flaps and the gasket material. That way I can do some thorough test fits. Based on the test fits that I've done so far of both the shroud and the radiator, the shroud did contact those heavy-duty sway bar mounts that this car has. So I did give a small relief cut into the shroud to be able to give clearance for those heavy-duty sway bar mount corners. And then as far as my contact on the radiator itself, part of the install is to swing the bottom of the radiator forward to give more sway bar clearance. And during that, the end tank of the radiator came into contact with the end of one of the condenser bolts. So I took that bolt out and I replaced it with a shorter one, about 3 millimeters shorter, that didn't stick through as far, and now my contact is eliminated. So we'll go ahead and proceed with getting all of this into the car. Alright, to get the bottom of the radiator to swing forward for that extra sway bar clearance, we do have to replace the original pegs, lower mounting pegs on the NA, with the supplied units that will give it a little bit of a standoff. So I'll go over this one in detail. I've already taken apart the other side. So it's a new peg, 1/4 inch fender washer. We reuse the rubber grommet. Within this tape is 7 1/4 inch washers. Now I'll explain why it's in tape. We're actually going to wait to install these until after the radiator's in the car, and trying to feed 7 washers onto that peg in the car is going to be pretty difficult. So if you can feed it on as one piece, voila, much easier. We'll then feed it through the bracket, and once it's through the bracket, a cotter pin will go into the last hole. This one's already been opened, so it's, well, you get the point. So I'll go ahead and talk about getting this one undone. Pretty straightforward process. Go ahead and give it a little downward pressure. You're just compressing the rubber bushing. That gives you access to the C-clip. So once that C-clip's removed, this slides out. Now, depending on your exact brackets, these holes may or may not be large enough to pass through. In this case, they were not. I took a 1/4-inch drill bit and just reamed through both holes to make it just large enough for these to fit. So now we're ready to get this in the car. All right, now we're gonna put a fan into the shroud, and I'm only gonna put the passenger side fan in, and here is why. We're gonna have the fan shroud already installed in the car, and we're gonna slip the radiator down in between it and the front bulkhead. As I slide the radiator down, this lower radiator hose barb is gonna wanna occupy the same space as the driver's side fan should it have been installed. So we're gonna wait to install it till that hose barb has cleared it, and there's a procedure for getting that fan into place afterward. But there's no reason to do that with the passenger side fan. It's easier to put it in now, so let's go ahead and do that. I am gonna orient both of my fans with the plugs toward the bottom of the car. Not an absolute requirement, but it does make it a lot cleaner and easier to wire. And if you notice on the fan shroud, on the end with the pigtail, there is a little plastic tab. That has to hook underneath the shroud. So we have to put that end in first. And then it takes a little bit of finesse to get it the rest of the way in. And there we go. We'll now install it with our low profile button head hardware. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on them just to make sure they don't rattle out of place. A driver to get them most of the way in, and a palm ratchet just to tighten them up. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and get the shroud into the car. Because of how wide it is, we're gonna have to drop it in where the radiator drops down, and then once it's down, we'll push it back. So, and just kind of find, it may want to drop out, so if you're a little uncomfortable about it, you can always put a floor jack to kind of hold it up a little bit. Make sure you don't hit your AC lines or condenser with the floor jack. All right, so that adds a little bit of security there. Okay, so now our next step is we're gonna get the radiator put in. So this is a little bit of a wrestling match, so make sure you're ready for it. Not only do you have to drop it in, but you kind of have to help guide things into position. Like pull the weather stripping up and over the hose barb. And you can just slowly lower it down. Now because we don't have our bottom hooks, we want to make sure it doesn't drop too far down. And there's bosses like this on the bottom side of the radiator that are going to hang up on the bottom side of the weather stripping. So you may have to reach underneath and kind of help feed that around. All right, and you can see we're about in position. So it's a little lower than it would normally be. So our next step, before we put any hardware in to secure things into place, I actually want to elevate the shroud and the radiator together a few inches up, because I'm going to need to drop the fan in from the top, and right now my sway bar is a little bit in the way. Now we did loosen it, which will help, but it can only go so far down because of AC lines. There's AC lines that pass underneath it on the passenger side. So I can't count on pushing that sway bar too far down, so we got to get the radiator up to give room for the fan to come in. And that may be enough, we'll give it a shot. All right, now let's grab that driver's side fan. Plug down, needs to go in front of the sway bar. So we'll start with that part. Now this is a tight fit. It is going to be a little bit of a struggle, especially on this car. We have a few extra lines to overcome. Remember, we have that tab at the bottom that does have to go in first. So it does have to kind of go in at an angle. You may experiment with rotating the fan body. You probably just don't want to do that too much. Don't force anything because you don't want to break the fan. But once you're there, it should just about pop into place. So we'll go ahead and throw in the upper hardware. And we'll just make these snug for now until we get the bottoms in, just to make sure we are all lined up. All right, now that we're done fighting that fan into place, we're gonna go ahead and lower the radiator down. And I'm gonna install the original upper bracket bolts into place. That will make sure that things are pretty well lined up for us to put our pegs in down below. So we'll do that now. We'll start by lowering it back down into position. I'll use the jack to guide it. Now, I'm not going to get these all the way tight. I'm going to just get them in, because I still want a little bit of flexibility. Get the jack out of the way. All right, let's go to the bottom. All right, before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and put the lower fan hardware in. So I'll start it by hand, get it tightened up later. There's one side. There's the other. A little trickier on this car because of the oil cooler. So let's see how we can get the ratchet up there. This side's not too bad. We'll start with this side. All right, and that feels good. Okay, lower fan is bolted in. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and bolt the bottom of the shroud to the radiator. Now, your kit is supplied with two different sizes. We have the short ones, which are for the 4 across the top, and the 2 lower ones on the passenger side. And the longer one is for the 2 on the bottom on the driver's side. Now, there's also a 1/4 millimeter spacer. That's just to do with the offset of the bosses. So let's go ahead and get those in place. Spacer goes between the shroud and the boss. So similar to other things, I'm going to leave things a little bit loose up until I have everything at least started. And these guys tighten up with a 5 millimeter Allen head socket. The fan bolts are a 4 millimeter Allen. Okay, last thing to do while we're down below is to take care of those pins we were going to get back to. All right, we're going to go ahead and put our pin in, and we're here on the passenger side. The driver's side is just about identical, with the exception of maybe different obstacles. This side's just a little bit easier to see, so it's better for demonstration. I'm going to start with your grommet. I'm going to go ahead and feed that into place first on its own, so it just drops into the hook. All right, now we got our grommet in place. We'll take our pin with the 1/4 inch fender washer. We'll get it started. May have to come up at an angle a little bit, but try to keep the grommet in the hook. As soon as that pin starts to come through, stop there. And this is where these taped up washers comes in handy. Imagine trying to put 7 different washers onto the tip of that pin. Wouldn't be a whole lot of fun. So we're going to put it in place and slowly feed the pin through the centers. if it will cooperate. Okay, there we go. Now we may have to give just a little bit of nudging on the radiator itself. That's why we left the top loose. We got the pin through the first part and the pin through the second part. Now you can see we have an exposed hole. That's where our cotter pin is going to go. Okay. All right, we have the pin in. Now time for the cotter pin. A pair of needle nose pliers makes the job a little easier. So if you need to, you can push and collapse that rubber just slightly. And it may take a little bit of finesse. Sorry to block the view. Cotter pin is in. Pull it down through a little bit more. Then we will see what we can do to spread it. This is the tricky part here, is getting it spread apart with limited access. All right, it doesn't need a whole bunch, it just needs enough to not come out. So there we are. So we'll do the same thing to the other side, and then we'll go ahead and go back up top, start our other bolts, and then tighten everything down. We'll then be done with the hard parts installation and can move on to electrical. All right, we're back up top. Let's go ahead and get our hardware installed on the top. We'll tighten that, go back down below, tighten the hardware on the bottom of the shroud down there. And I missed a step. I was supposed to leave one of the fan bolts out, the lower left side of the passenger fan. Because this is an NA, the AC lines need to be relocated and they need to use that fan boss. So we'll get there soon enough. Back up here, let's get those bolts in. That's why I leave things loose, is in case you have to do light amount of shifting to get things to line up just right. Okay, done up top with hardware. Let's go down back below. Down below, let's tighten up our hardware. Let's get rid of this bracket and get these AC lines secured how they need to be. We might actually remove that bracket first because it's kind of interfering with my ability to get that bolt tightened. And this one might get a little tricky with the AC line in the intercooler, so let me grab an extension and I can come through. There we go. Still not a ton of working space, but enough. Now I'll remove this bracket. It's held on with two 10mm nuts. This one's a bit rusty, but thankfully it's coming apart. First try. So, bracket comes off. All right, now that we've removed the bracket, we're gonna reuse the upper P-clamp that came off that bracket. We might have to move it over just a little bit. We're gonna mount it into the lower fan shroud bolt, the passenger side fan on the driver's side of that fan. We're gonna replace that bolt that we had already put in there with the long one supplied with the kit and a 1/4mm spacer to stand that P-clamp off the fan. We then use the supplied short M6 bolt, washer, and lock nut, as well as the supplied P-clamp to secure the P-clamp here to the line here I gave this P-clamp a little bit of a pinch. That way it's nice and snug if there's not slop. So you may need to do the same to eliminate any slop, because you want to hold these lines nice and firm so they don't move around and fatigue the aluminum. So we'll go ahead and move on to tightening a few things up underneath here yet, and then we'll move up to the top. All right, moving on to the lower radiator hose, we'll get that reattached. And now we can't forget our sway bar brackets. This one's pretty tricky to get in there because of this particular intercooler kit. All right, now let's get hardware in place. There's one. Come on this side. That's in place now. All right, bushing number 2. Bracket. All right, all tightened up. All right, we're back up top and we're gonna address some things we left off with. I did not tighten the upper radiator brackets to the chassis, so I'll do that now. Okay, and the other side. All right. Now I'm going to move on to our overflow tank line. It has a P-clamp on it from its old radiator, so we'll need to relocate that. So we'll loosen it up. Bring it over, so I'm going to put it on that guy there. Undo this one. Okay, and we want that to go underneath the upper radiator hose, so we'll do that now. We're missing our clamp, so I need to track that down first. Found it. It's a pretty tight fit, the shroud against the hose, so working your clamp into place might be a little bit tricky. I'm going to try putting it onto the barb first and working the hose into it. There we go. All right, now onto the electrical. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about the kit or the installation, please give us a call or send us an email. And stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to be going over the wiring and the controller installation for this kit. We'll see you then.